You do not have to be scared to make noodles from scratch anymore because I have the easiest homemade egg noodle recipe. The recipe is so easy that any of my kids can make it. In fact, it is the most requested meal for me to make is homemade chicken and noodles, where I use this exact egg noodle recipe. Hi, I am Carrie with eatingonadime.com, and you're going to love today's video. It's simple, it's easy, and it really makes you look like you can do anything in the kitchen. So grab the recipe linked in the description below, and let's go make some noodles.
First, we're going to start with 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Now, it's very important for you to measure your flour correctly. You just scoop it up and then use a knife or the back of a spoon to just smooth the flour off. You do not want to pack your flour, or you're going to find out that your noodles are just not as good. So this is the trick anytime you're baking and cooking with flour on how to measure your flour perfectly every single time. Next, we want to add 2 teaspoons of salt into the same bowl and mix it together with your spoon. Once that's well combined, we're going to use the spoon to make like a hole in the middle of the flour, or what we like to call a well. This is where we're going to put our eggs and milk and oil right into the center. So we're going to crack 2 eggs into the center of our flour. Whoops, make sure there's no shells in there so that way you can have the tastiest egg noodles. Next, we're going to add a 1/4 cup of milk and about a teaspoon of oil. You can use like a vegetable oil, an olive oil, or even an avocado oil. Today, I'm doing an avocado oil. We begin mixing in the middle to get those eggs cracked and combined, and then slowly adding in the flour. This is a great way so we don't have to dirty up multiple bowls when we're making this. So that's why we start from the beginning and then slowly add in. Now the batter will be really thick, and that's exactly what you want. Once it starts to get too thick to stir, it's time for us to knead it on a floured surface. So I'm going to just spoon out a little bit of flour and sprinkle it onto my clean counters, or you could do like a cutting board, but I find it easier to do it straight on the counters. We're going to dump this mixture directly onto the counters and then start kneading it. Now when you knead, you're simply pressing in the middle with each hand, folding and then pressing again. If you find that it is sticky, you can simply add just a little bit more flour on top to knead it into. You just want to make sure you're not adding too much flour. So I only add it when it is really sticky, and you can always use the flour that is already on your surface that you're kneading on. Now once it is no longer sticky and is ready to form into a ball, it's time to roll it out. I'm going to use a rolling pin to roll this out, and I have it linked below. You're going to want to make sure you are working on a floured surface and flipping regularly. This is to make sure that it doesn't stick to your counter or to the rolling pin. I like to do little strokes with it to roll it out because it's very thick, and so it takes a little bit longer to do. Now there are lots of really cool things that you can do to actually flatten this, but I just like using a traditional rolling pin. So our goal is to roll it out into a rectangle or a square shape. Continue rolling it out until you get into a square or rectangle shape. You want it as thin as possible. Use those muscles to get it as thin as you'd like. The thicker this is, the thicker your noodles are going to be. Now obviously we do want them a little thick because homemade noodles are supposed to be thicker, but I tend to like it as thin as possible because then you'll have the perfect noodles when you're cooking them up. sure you continue flipping in between the roll. This is important to prevent it from sticking. And I also like to add a little more flour if needed. See how thin we got that? That's perfect and beautiful. Now I'm going to show you my trick to save a ton of time when you're making noodles. Take the long end and slowly start folding it up, kind of like you would a cinnamon roll. You don't want it really to be folded, you want it to be rolled, and this is going to make cutting our egg noodles so much faster. Rolled up dough onto a cutting board and use a sharp knife to cut the roll in half and then cut them in half lengthwise. Turn it and then run your knife through the dough, making strips. Be sure to move quickly. You do not want to push it down, and make sure you have a really sharp knife so you can have these adorable little noodles cut in no time. Now we're going to do the exact same on the other half. Cut it lengthwise, flip it, and then run your knife to create these little egg noodles. Now they're not going to look like it at first, but when you run your fingers through it to separate them, you will see that you have these little perfect egg noodle slices without doing all that extra work. Just make sure to handle them carefully because you don't want to smush them back together. Now, I like to let them rest for about 30 minutes before I cook them. Meanwhile, we're going to boil some water and gently drop the egg noodles into the water. Now, it's really easy to cook, but be careful. I like to drop them in just a little bit at a time so that way they don't all clump up together. You can put them in there all at once, but you're going to have to be very gentle so they don't stick together and then cook in one lump. Use a good spoon and gently stir. Be very careful so you are breaking apart any of them that might have accidentally stuck together, so that way they're able to cook evenly. You're going to boil the water and cook for about 12 to 14 minutes or until the egg noodles are tender, and I like to pull one out so that way I can taste test it. You'll know they're finished because they'll start to sink towards the bottom of the pot and not just all float up at the top. Some will still be at the top, but you'll see that they will poof up and just look amazing. Once they are cooked through, use a slotted spoon to remove the egg noodles from the boiling water. Now, if you're going to cook these in a soup, or like my homemade chicken and noodles that I was talking about, you're obviously going to eliminate this step because you're going to be cooking them in the broth with the chicken. And I'll explain more on that at eatingonadime.com.
Homemade noodles are not difficult. Oh, I just want to eat them. Okay, but before I start digging in, let me give you some of my tips. These can substitute for any recipes that need noodles in them. So, for example, I am linking some of my favorite ones like crock-pot chicken noodle soup, our homemade chicken noodle soup. We have a beef and noodles. Anytime you're going to use noodles, you can throw in these. So one of the easiest ways to make my kids' favorite recipe would be homemade chicken and noodles. And it's kind of like chicken and noodles meets dumplings because we're doing our homemade noodles. But what you're going to do is follow the recipe just like you do, but while you're boiling that water back there in the pot, you're going to throw in like 2 chicken breasts, okay? You're going to cook them until they shred them, and then you're going to cook your noodles. Now, and it tastes amazing. It's delicious and it's an easy dinner. But different ways that you can make these noodles taste even better. My favorite way would just be doing chicken broth. So cooking them in chicken broth just bumps up the flavor even more. But when they come out, if you want to just have noodles just as a side dish, which is also delicious as well, I like topping it with a little bit of butter and then salt and pepper. Everything tastes better with salt and pepper. But regardless of how you make it, you can take this simple recipe and you can make it amazing anyway. Okay, it's time to dig in. Remember, you can get the full recipe with nutritional information and all of our tips and tricks linked below. And don't forget, like and subscribe so you don't miss any more of our family-friendly recipes. And I cannot wait to see you make some homemade noodles. I will see you next time in my kitchen. Bye, friends. Oh, God.
Wait.